Okay. All right, guys. I think we're up and running. Looks to be okay. So let me make sure my PowerPoints are functioning this time around. Yeah, okay. So we had obviously we're dealing with the fire issue. So by the way, it's me. It's Dr. Bruce. So I haven't seen you guys since Monday. We had our issues on Wednesday, obviously. So with the fires and everything else that's going on. So for just a couple of things before I get going on today's topic, I've been communicating to you through email, and here's the reason I want to address this. So I've had, in not just with you guys in this class, with all of my classes, I've had a number of students asking questions about asking questions about things that I've already communicated to them on, which suggests either they're not reading their Corbin email or something else. So first and foremost, check your Corbin email. This is how most professors are going to communicate with you. In addition, so I've had some students that said, well, wait a minute, I didn't get that email. So if you're registered in the class, then you got the email. It's how the Populi system works, and I'm using the email because it allows us to be more detailed, as opposed to the texting option, which is a different option that I'm not going to mess with for this class or any other. So I'm sending them through email. You have to check your Corbin email, and the other thing you must do is make sure that you don't even accidentally have your email system set up to kind of forward a bunch of emails from professors into a junk mail file that you don't even ever see. So you need to make sure that you've got your email protocols put in place properly so that you're actually receiving these emails through the Populi system. Okay? And please do so. Please check your emails consistently as we move through not only the next few days, but throughout the course of the semester, so that when I need to communicate with you, I can make sure that you're getting the correct information. So that's where we are. I've had a couple of other questions that I'm just going to mention in passing. So I need you guys to get in. Obviously I have a number of students who have not taken the time to go into Populi and access either the syllabus or, in many cases, some of the ancillary documents that I put in there. So on the syllabus page in the course, Populi course page in Populi, you click on syllabus, you'll see where the syllabus is. There's also, that's the page where there will be links that I'm giving you, so just for your awareness. And then for documents, a lot of the documents that I'm posting, I'm putting through the files feature. So you have to click on files in the course page. And then I have some folders for class outlines and also some folders for instructions and assignments, a folder for instructions and assignments, excuse me. So in the instructions and assignments folder, a lot of you need to go through and read those documents carefully, particularly the documents regarding the video presentations that you're going to do, the video and worldview presentations that you're each going to do. You've been assigned to groups. That was randomly done. I've already sent a note out about that. So you're all in a set, right? A worldview set. And your names fell into those sets randomly. There are like, about 4 students per set. And once you locate your name, so there's a document telling you, where you'll be, then you need to read through the instructions carefully. I'm not going to recite them all to you over the course of this presentation. You need to read through the instructions carefully. The idea is that you'll each do one video presentation individually, not with other members in a group, even though the set, there are 4 or so people in that set. You're not interacting with them. You don't have to. I mean, If you want to interact with them separately on a separate issue or whatever, that's fine. But you're not interacting for the purposes of this assignment. You are each going to choose one of the movies in that set, and you're going to do your evaluation. And there are 7 movies in each, philosophy and worldview set, and you're choosing one of them for your video presentation. So you've got to do one video presentation. Those groups, that association is all set up. You can find your name, figure out which set you're in, and do your video. And the idea here is, of course, to address some of the artistic components of the film. You can address those a little bit, but your focal point has to be the worldview, the philosophy that is the foundation that lies in the midst of this film. And you're going to be coming, by the time you're doing these are not due for another month or so, a little less than a month now, about a month. The first of them are going to be due in about a month. So beginning in October and moving through the remainder of the semester, you guys are each going to do these videos, and you'll have some prep by that time regarding worldview. I've given you some specific instructions. There's an instruction sheet that has, walks you through how you should, how you should approach this video and which kinds of segments you should plan on including in it. So please read through that material. I think that part of it should be pretty straightforward by now. The other part that's confusing students, so I'm going to say this again, and then I'll leave it there for the moment. In addition to the video assignment you're each doing, each student in the class must, in the second half of the course, they must watch and do a worldview review, a philosophy worldview review of films. So you must review 4. The only caveat is this: you can choose any 4 films. They have to be 4 from 4 separate worldview categories on the film choices list. So 4 films from 4 different categories. The caveat is that you are not allowed to do your written film review, watch and review a film. You're not allowed to do one for the same grouping you were in for your individual video. So that is it. So let's say you're in the Marxism video, that you do your individual video that you create and post to YouTube and that we all watch. You do that on one of the films in Marxism. Well, that's fine. That means that when you do your 4 reviews, your 4 film reviews, you can choose any 4 categories other than Marxism. So that would mean there are 7 remaining categories other than Marxism, and you have to choose 4 of the 7. Okay? That's what that means. I think that should be clear. If you guys still have questions, we can talk about it next week. Those assignments are in the future. You're not quite there yet. In fact, I don't think you're quite prepped for doing all the film review stuff. And I'm going to be walking you through some film things at the after the midterm, so it's a little bit off yet. I'm going to be walking you through kind of a prep for how you approach this and how we think about films through a philosophical lens. So we're getting there. Right now, we just need to really dig our way through and make sense of these worldviews in themselves, which is the Sire text is a basis for that, and obviously these contextual syntheses that I'm walking you guys through. So I think that's it for now. One more note. I was hoping to have a bit of an interactive time regarding C.S. Lewis and the abolition of man, because I had you watch those video segments that I linked to the Course Populi page. What I think I will do, I was going to actually talk through some stuff here right now, but I think what I'd rather do, because Monday we're slated to do our time with secular humanism, and that's a topic I can work through pretty simply, straightforward fashion. It's not that tough to walk you through some of that stuff compared to some of the other worldviews. So I think what I'd prefer to do is on Monday, assuming we are all actually together again, physically. So again, by the way, this means that group B, right? So then group B. Yeah, that's right. So group B will be in the classroom on Monday, assuming we're on campus for in-person sessions. Group B will be the rotation in class with me on Monday. Group A will be Zooming in with the OWL camera. So, but regardless, we can interact. That's one thing I like about the OWL system is we can do some of that. So we're getting better and better at it. So I think for about 15, 20 minutes on Monday, I'm going to revisit C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man for a short time. And then we'll move on. We'll talk about secular humanism. And we'll have time, I think, to get through what we need to. So that's my plan. Which brings us to Marxism. So, sorry, it's hard for me to read sometimes with screens and things. So you'll have to forgive these stupid looking reading glasses. I don't like them very much either, but I have to be able to see. And here's my coffee. Very important today to stay awake for me and for you. So let's dig into how we dissect Karl Marx's concepts of socialism and communism. And one of the things that students sometimes respond to here with this class is, how applicable is a class that's essentially about philosophy. We're dealing with, with a compare and contrast scenarios a lot of the time. So worldview evaluation and whatnot, but we're certainly digging into philosophy. And I think the misnomer is that a lot of these ideas, a lot of these philosophies are somehow dead and living in the past. And really, none of the philosophies we're going to associate with this semester are dead and in the past, but none more so than Marxism. If there's a philosophy this semester that we're a catastrophic philosophy, and a selection, a group of ideas that has had an absolutely an unbelievably negative, catastrophic impact on humanity across time, it is definitely Marxism. So for starters, I want you to be aware that these concepts, we may be talking about Karl Marx himself and what he said and what he believed and what he and Friedrich Engels wrote about. And that may have occurred in the mid-19th century, but make no mistake, the applications of these principles are very much alive and well, and we don't have to simply look to countries like China or Venezuela or what have you. These concepts are being promulgated even in our midst in this country. The concepts that take a Marxist orientation toward the explanation for all of humanity and attach various theories to them. Right now, the en vogue thing to do is to use the Marxist skeleton, the philosophical skeleton or scaffolding, if you will, as the basis, and then attach all sorts of radical theories to it that combine neatly and well with Marxism. So critical theory in particular, or most common in this moment, critical race theory. And all of it is based on this idea that we cannot speak of human beings in a unified sense, and that we cannot really, it's not as helpful to understand human beings through the lens of their individual personalities and character traits and virtues and vices, but that we as human beings should divide other human beings into broad groups who we then judge according to some pretty arbitrary standards. And those arbitrary standards are very, of course, as we're going to see, very Marxist in nature. Those standards are group identity standards, whereby if you are an individual who is labeled a certain way and sent into the oppressor group, so that's the group you belong to, then you are damned. You are in that group. You are an oppressor. You have no choice in the matter. You are an oppressor. And likewise, if you are lucky enough, I suppose, if you want to say it that way, if you are identified as someone who's part of an oppressed group, then lucky you, you are able in this arbitrary sense to have attained this level of virtue, this level of arbitrarily assigned virtue and benevolence, and you deserve recognition for your place in that oppressed group, and you are being oppressed by these others. And this is how we talk about human societies. So we divide them into oppressors and oppressed, and we take it from there and decide how to deal with those horrible oppressors, to throw off the oppression and reorganize society according to the grounds of Marxist principles, which are thoroughly based in race, class, gender propositions. Okay, this is probably some of this stuff you've heard, circling around, but we got to dig into it a little bit, and we got to look at it through a worldview lens. So you've got your outlines, and I'm going to be digging through some of this with you. And remember that with Marxism, we must talk about, a worldview evaluation, as always, through the lens of creation, fall, and redemption, which means for us that, sorry, I want to make sure my camera is where I need it here so that my back can be comfortable as I'm sitting here. More coffee. Good stuff. I'm drinking some, for those of you who care, I have my Celtic mug here, and I'm drinking a blend called Highland Grog. Highland Grog in the Scottish lexicon, right? Well, that's good stuff. Right then. On we go. So through the lens of creation, fall, redemption, this is how we have to evaluate not only the Christian worldview and the components we associate with it, but obviously when we critique other worldviews, we have to look at how the philosophy, how the worldview answers these questions. Where do we come from, right? Who are we? How did we get here? And through the lens of fall, right? What's gone wrong? Now, why is there so much conflict in the world? What is the source of evil and suffering? And then obviously through the lens of redemption, how do we tackle these problems? What do we do to set things right, or at least to make them dramatically better for all of humanity? And it's obvious, it becomes patently obvious when we start thinking about things through these worldview concepts. It becomes obvious that Marxism is so much more than just some sort of a socio-economic theory. It is a full-fledged worldview. And we've got to start thinking about it along those lines. And, I think for me, I take some heat. I'm just going to tell you guys up front, I have taken some heat from students over the past few years, and even from some colleagues, I suppose, regarding my approach to this particular subject in the Worldview Seminar, because Marxism is a hot button social topic right now, because there are a lot of Americans, there are a lot of Westerners, particularly Americans, who are becoming enamored by this philosophy all over again, even in the face of the menace of Marxism in human history over the past century or more. There are far too many people who are unwittingly, perhaps, becoming duped all over again by the heresies, the horrors of the Marxist philosophy. And, in our American culture right now, this has, Marxism has kind of attached itself philosophically. Maybe I'll reverse that. Leftist progressivism as a philosophy has attached itself to the Marxist foundation and has run with it. And, I think we as Christians need to be aware of the foundational philosophical principles of the things that we hear and see, and even of the things that we attach ourselves to. So this is not I'm not going to get into a political discussion right now here today. We have an election coming up in a few months, which will be, I just think it's going to be crazy. But, I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys who I think you should vote for. This is not about me telling you which political party you must automatically choose, but I do think you need to know the philosophies that are at the heart and core of beliefs and ideas and protocols that are being thrown around. We've just got to be careful. We got to know what we're talking about. So I guess I'll leave that at that. If you have questions, you can come and talk to me in further detail. Marxism, I'd say, fits the three categories of worldview: creation, fall, redemption. It fits them so neatly that many philosophers have actually called it a religious heresy, which I think is kind of ironic, given Marx's views of Christianity specifically, but of religion more broadly. So if you're not aware, Marx famously said that religion was the opiate of the masses, right? In other words, that it's a human construct created by human beings to pacify themselves, to help them get through life, to use as a crutch, essentially, right? It has no bearing on reality. In fact, Marx views religion as highly destructive and divisive, and actually as a tool. He views religion broadly, certainly Christianity specifically, Marx viewed as a tool that was wielded by the aristocrats, by the oppressors, a tool wielded by the oppressors against the masses to keep them, to keep them splayed out and subservient. Well, in that sense, right? So we've got to attack this scenario and figure out what he was saying. So this is alive and well. This is not a philosophy that has lost its interest groups and is still being promoted. So we encounter an assortment of, largely leftist movements. Politically correct is an association I would put in here as well. Movements that are sometimes called neo-Marxist. I think that's I don't use that term a whole lot myself because honestly, most of the movements I see right now, there's no reason to say they're neo. Neo-Marxist means basically new Marxist, as if what they're saying is a variant, something additive. And honestly, it's mostly just orthodox Marxism. So I don't see the need to say neo-Marxist. But it's true that these groups, they're applying Marxist forms of analysis to groups, as I said, identified by race, class, or gender, urging them to do what? Urging, as Marx urged the bourgeoisie, urged the proletariat to do, to throw off their oppressors, to raise their consciousness and throw off their oppressors. So we can weigh this and measure it, evaluate it through this lens, beginning with Marx's approach to origins. So how did Marx explain life and where life came from and what it was meant to be? So for Marx, this is a very important component. He believed that the ultimate creative power was in fact matter itself. And this was a new form. Sire walks you through some of this. He's a bit convoluted for my liking on this topic, by the way. So I'm bringing to you a synthesis of what I learned from my philosophical mentors, among them Jim Spiegel and Arthur Holmes, Alvin Plantinga. So some really fantastic philosophers that bring this, I think, clarity to this issue. So his idea was that the ultimate power, the ultimate creative power, Marx's idea was that the ultimate creative power was matter, it's physical matter. So which is at the time, a new form of what we sometimes call philosophical naturalism or materialism. because earlier forms had been static, kind of picturing the world as a vast machine of sorts. The problem with the concept of viewing the world as a vast machine, the problem with that for Marx was that if you buy into that, if you buy into the machine concept of the universe, it seemed to open the door to at least the idea of God. I mean, in just logical pattern there, right? So if a machine is designed to fulfill a particular function, it virtually requires a designer, right? Just as a watch implies the existence of a watchmaker. So Marx looked at that scenario and he hated it. He did not want to even open the door to the possibility of that concept with God. So to avoid that conclusion, here's essentially what Marx did. Marx proposed that the material universe, right, matter, the material universe that we know was not static as had been discussed and imagined by previous philosophers. Marx says that instead of being static, it's dynamic, right? And what he means by that is that in a dynamic universe, the universe itself, matter itself, contains the power of motion, that contains the power of change, contains the power of development. So, there's a famous phrase when you read Marx, he uses the phrase dialectical materialism. And that's what he meant by it, that we're living in a dynamic universe. In a philosophical concept, so Dr. Holmes used to tell students, Dr. Holmes was a phenomenal philosopher at Wheaton College for decades. And Dr. Holmes used to tell students that really what Marx did here was he embedded the prime mover, it's a philosophical term, right? The prime mover within matter. The prime mover for a theist is, of course, God. But Marx is making the prime mover matter. So he makes, in a very real sense, Marx makes matter into God. The universe in this Marxist sense, the universe itself, the constituents of the material universe become self-originating, self-operating, right? Moving inexorably toward some ultimate goal. So that is Marx's concept for origins. It's a thoroughly materialist and naturalist concept. And this helps us to explain what his idea of the original state for humanity was. So he's actually borrowing some from Rousseau. If you recall what we talked about with Rousseau, the idea is that civilization corrupts. Remember that human beings should be allowed to choose very differently, and that civilization has undermined humanity by forcing on them concepts like family and religion and all the and relationships and parenting and all the rest. Rousseau was just an unbridled mess philosophically, just horrible stuff. So Marx is going to borrow from that a little bit. His counterpart to what we might call as the original state of humanity, what we sometimes refer to as the Garden of Eden state, right? Marx's counterpart was this weird argument about the original state of communism. So whereby, as we'll see here, human beings are living collectively, and there's no wealth, privilege, disparity, division because of this ostensibly utopian vision that Marx is attempting to create. So that is a sort of the state of innocence. And, for Rousseau, it had been, this discussion about the origins of humanity being like the noble savage that relates to others in, free-formed fashion, fairly, honestly, apparently unaware of anything like a concept of sin, and is able to just sing, get together with the fellow humans that they encounter and sing, hold hands and sing Kumbaya ostensibly. Well, Marx is basically saying something similar here. So the question becomes, how did humanity fall? So Marx says that the fall from this original state of innocence into oppression, into slavery, he says, as you're probably not surprised to learn, he makes a socioeconomic construct here. And he says that the fall from innocence into an oppressed slave-like state where there's division and harm and corruption and everything else, he says it's because human beings created private property. Created those who might have and might have not, right? And from this human constructed economic fall arose all the levels, I'll use a different phrase actually, all the evils of exploitation and greed and class struggle. So that's the argument. And of course, I mean, just so we're continuing this line of thought pretty succinctly for the moment, if that's your argument for how we fell from the state of original communism and innocence into corruption and greed and division and struggle and strife and all the rest, and the haves and the have-nots, the oppressors and the oppressed, well, how do you make it right again? Again, there's a lot of borrowing from Rousseau here, the argument along the lines of some sort of a state system. So Rousseau had argued that you have to rely on the state, and the state will be your savior in a very real sense. Marx is going to borrow heavily from that concept too. So redemption for a Marxist, for Karl Marx himself and for anyone subscribing to his belief system, redemption comes about by reversing that fallen system. So in this case, destroying things like private property and ownership and difference and separation between human beings. So any who have while others might not have the same things, anyone who possesses access to power or privilege or what have you, then that's a bad situation. Regardless of whether they have worked very hard to earn what they possess, it doesn't really matter, not through the lens of Marxism. So the redemption must happen. In the case of Marx, this is the suggestion, destroying all the scenarios that have been created by human beings to reflect those in power and those who are wishing they had power. So who are the redeemers? Well, of course, for the Marxist, it's anyone who doesn't have what they desire to have. And he's really grouping them into a very specific socioeconomic group in his original arguments, but in some subsequent letters and articles that he wrote, he's even more clear on this. It is really what I just said. It's not just about what he identifies originally as the proletariat, the urban factory workers in Europe at the time. Those were his redeemers. Those were his heroes. So he and Engels are using them as these benevolent, selfless, injured, oppressed people who rise up against any middle class or upper class factory owner or what have you. So his redeemers are the proletariat who will rise up in revolution against their oppressors, their capitalist oppressors. Okay, I think it helps to kind of break this down a little bit more. Sorry, I keep hiccuping here. Apologize. Trying not to. Good coffee today. So let's try to break this down a little bit. So we've got Uncle Carl here, looking so benevolent and visionary here in this particular photograph, like some sort of warped version of Santa Claus. But he's nothing like that, and his personal life was a mess. I'm not going to dig into all that right now because we need to dissect his ideas. So let's break this down. So we've already discussed that when we talk about origins, Marx is saying that life in the universe is explained by self-creating, self-generating matter. Okay, we've got that. So how do we dig into that and try to isolate a Christian evaluation, a biblical worldview evaluation? All right. Well, a crucial subpoint under, a worldview association with creation. So a crucial subpoint is one's view of human nature. We know that as Christians, we believe that human beings were originally created, perfectly by God, but with our free wills, and that we chose sin, that we are part of this original sin stemming back from original creation through Adam and Eve to the present. And that we are in this ongoing rebellion against our Creator. And Christians are well aware that we are still part of that rebellion, even if we claim Christ to be Lord and Savior, and that we are going to be fighting against our sinful nature for the remainder of our lives. And that sin nature has so many different implications and outflowing applications. But Marx obviously doesn't believe that. So let's dig into this. So one's view of human nature is at the heart and core of this. In a philosophical sense, humanity is always defined by its relationship to God, or to whatever is regarded as ultimate reality. So we are always, in this sense, trying to figure out how we understand ourselves in relation to God, or in Marx's case, in relation to what he regards as ultimate reality, which is matter. By the way, guys, I didn't say at the beginning, so I'll pause for just a second. I've had at least 5 or 6 questions about, so are we supposed to take notes during these recorded lectures? Absolutely, yes. I'm sorry if there was any confusion on that. These are functioning as our class sessions. So our time together in class sessions, you need to be taking notes, because I'm bringing together a synthesis. You're not going to be finding this synthesis on Wikipedia, and Sire brings some of this into focus for you. I'm bringing it into as much of a clear focus as I can, even more so. So please make sure that you're not just watching and eating popcorn. As entertaining as this might be, I need you to be taking notes. So relation to God or reality, this is the critical point. So in Marxism, let's be clear, what's the relationship? In Marxism, we're defined by the way in which we as human beings relate to God? No. We're defined by the way we relate to matter, the way we manipulate it and make things out of it to meet our needs. In short, we are defined by the human capacity to produce, the means of production, which is a phrase that Marx used. So Marx's thoroughgoing materialism, it's a totally secularized concept. There's nothing about Marxism that relates well, fits neatly with a theistic worldview. He's entirely opposed to a theistic worldview. His entire structure is based on resisting and casting off a theistic worldview to create his own concepts here. So that human beings are no longer part of this problem of religion, and that they are relating to matter, of course, but also to one another very differently, as he sees fit to suggest. So his materialism explains why he embraced economic determinism, why he regarded everything in human life, from politics to science to religion, as kind of superstructure, in a sense, built on economic relations. And what the implication of this is really critical for us to understand. So if you've been dozing off already, or if You know, you're getting snacks and coming back and forth to the screen, and or if you're cooking from across the room, just haphazardly listening to what I have to say, time to drop all that crap for a moment and hone in, okay? Really important. You can't miss this. So those concepts of origins and creation, and you know, the concept of how humans relate to matter, that's critical for Marx. But just think about the extension into Marx's concept of the fall that we just talked about a few minutes ago. So the fall exists because of the rise, the human construct of division, of private property, of material possessions that people have that other people do not have. Notice that Marx, in that concept, in that formulation, quite opposed to Christianity, Marx does not identify the ultimate source of evil as some sort of a universal moral failing in human beings. In fact, the more you read Marx, the more we dig into Marx, the more we realize he went out of his way to avoid that scenario entirely. So there's not some sort of a universal moral failing in all human beings. And one major reason for that is because if that is allowed, it would imply that human beings, all human beings, have some levels of moral culpability. All human beings, regardless of where they come from, who they are, how much money they have or don't have, et cetera, that all human beings have moral failings and moral responsibilities. And if that's true, it means that the solution would probably involve some levels of forgiveness and salvation. Marx can't allow that. Marx, his whole structure, his whole worldview structure is built on avoiding those scenarios completely. So instead, what has he done here? Marx has located human evil in social and economic relations. Thus, the implication is quite clear. The solution for Marx, if you locate evil in these human constructs of society and economics, of, again, those who have, those who don't have, those who are oppressors and those who are oppressed. If you locate evil in those who have versus those who don't have, if you locate evil in those who are oppressors, right? The solution is to simply change the relations between those groups, to change them specifically through revolution. Now, we're not in class together, so I'm not going to make this an interactive moment, but I typically do. If you're listening, you're watching and listening, and you start to let your brain spin, I think you'll see that there are some really horrible implications. And here's the crucial one. If the solution is that you have these groups and you have one that's the villain and one that is viewed as more heroic and more benevolent, and the whole idea is that you encourage the more heroic, the oppressed group to throw off oppression and revolt. What's the implication behind all this? Don't miss this. This is the crux of the whole time together today. Marxism assumes that human nature itself, that who we are as human beings, can be transformed simply by changing external social structures. So our humanness, for a Marxist, has far less, if anything, to do with sin nature, certainly, which we've just discussed. It has far less to do with individual qualities, both virtues and vices, content of one's character. Marxism doesn't focus on those things. Marxism says you have structures created by oppressors. Those are external structures. You change those structures, you change laws, you change economic systems, you grant people who have previously not had access to power and privilege, you give them access to power and privilege. You change the structures in your society. That reverses the course of humanity. That's where redemption comes from. I think we're seeing right now in our own society, as it unspools around us, and in some ways as it implodes from the inside out around us, we're seeing a lot of people out here in our world who have bought this. They may not have read a word of Marx in their entire lives. They may not really know a whole lot about who Marx was. But these ideas have been repackaged and resold, remarketed, and attached to contemporary moments. But don't mistake them for what they are. Marx's notion here of redemption is obviously sold through the lens of revolution, overthrowing oppressors and recreating original paradise, right? The day of judgment in Marxism is the day of revolution, when the evil oppressors, where the middle class factory workers or factory owners, I should say, where the bourgeoisie, who he defines as the evil ones, where they'll be condemned. But I do hope you see the huge downsides here. Now there's a real element of importance to tackle. Are we saying that there are no oppressed people? Of course we're not saying that. Has human oppression existed in human history? We all know that it has. Are there times when there is a group dynamic involved? We know that there are times. And when evil is prevalent, when it is discovered, as was the case in 1930s Germany and early 1940s Germany, when National Socialism took over in the Reich, run by the Nazi Party under Adolf Hitler and his cronies. Well, the world ultimately discovered the evils that set that society in motion, and they tackled them. But I guess the problem here is the assumption that, you can't, the assumption that socioeconomic and political structures themselves, right, are the ways to change human existence. That will actually somehow change who human beings are, how they think of themselves, how they relate to the universe around them that has been, of course, through a Christian lens, created for them. These structures we live in, the physical structures surrounding us in our lives, those don't determine who we are as human beings and who we are created to be, The other thing that's very nerve-wracking from a Marxist perspective is the horribly callous and I think catastrophic notion that you can simplistically divide people into groups and decide merely by skin color or class or education or belief system, like religious belief. You can decide that people who you name are in these groups. You can decide that they are either oppressors or oppressed. Their qualities, their positive and negative traits are not considered in full inherent crucial context. Instead, they are grouped. Human beings are what we all are. We are fallen and sinful. We have value as imago Dei creations. We have significant virtues and many flaws, no matter who we are or where we come from. And that is a much more important and holistic approach to this matter than the opposite one coming through the lens of Marxism. So I guess I would say this: is it right to address oppression? We all know that it is right to address oppression and it must be dealt with, but it is better to deal with it in more nuanced, full, contextual fashion, and recognize that there might be some measures that can be undertaken to improve the situations of certain individuals or perhaps even certain groups who are disenfranchised or who are truly, genuinely oppressed, if that is truly good and right and part of a virtuous, cohesive society. But what Marxism actually does is it divides people up. It creates unhealthy levels of suspicion and division and jealousy and self-righteousness, and also reverses the notion of what is right and true and good. There are plenty of reasons to look at systems like westernized democracies who are market-driven capitalist societies and understand very quickly and easily how many have been raised from levels of poverty-stricken existence to far greater levels of equality and access to privilege, to certainly standards of living that are far better for human beings. This is an absolute truth that is easy to measure, and yet the lie of Marxism is to convince those who have not become, in the Western lexicon, right, those who have not become multimillionaires or billionaires, those who do not have vacation homes, those who do not have expensive European automobiles and sports cars, those who do not have those things have been deprived of something they have a right to, and that the answer is to rebel against anyone and everyone who has those things, and to believe that rebellion is virtuous. That is taking Marx at his word, and it creates impulses that are very destructive. Okay, guys and gals, that is an introduction to Marx, and obviously it's not the last word on Marxism that we're going to have this semester, but I think it's at least an important synthesis for you. Remember that to be looking for emails, just in case this situation with the smoke and everything continues, and we are not on campus on Monday, which is a possibility. So I will obviously be sending you guys messages. For now, I hope that you've gotten a lot out of this video recording, this synthesis, and I'll hope to reconnect with you guys soon, okay? Have a good rest of your evening and weekend. I will hopefully see you guys in the very near future.